Good morning. Welcome to the Human Author. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today reading from the fifth book in my Light Chaser series, The Warning. The Warning is what I'm reading today. If you have any questions about the series or if you'd like to learn more, you can visit jbcantwell.com and look under Light Chaser. Boy, what a morning. I'm going to go ahead and read what I wrote on Friday. And just an announcement for you that from now on, I am only going to be reading on Fridays. So it'll be the entire week's worth of work and alone so that you can listen to the whole thing. Okay, so here's what I've got from last week. What did this mean? Part of me felt certain that the man had been more than a torrents. He looked back in the grass, closing his eyes with relief. Oh, thank you, he said. Kill me if you must, but please, please do not send me back to him. Who him? I asked, for it was possible that he'd been controlled by someone other than Torin. His eyes grew wide. I don't know him by name, just by his thoughts. He is not a good man. He wishes terrible things upon those who stand in his way. His face softened. But now I'm free. Tell me, do you have any more of that liquid? Kenneth stepped in front of me, looking down at the man angrily. The light is not for you. You've already had too much, and we had little to share to begin with. Now get up. He poked at him with the club. At first, the man looked frightened, but then his face hardened, and it occurred to me that whatever it was he'd been through at Torin's hands was much more torturous than getting jabbed with Kenneth's weapon. I'm not sure if I can. Kenneth glanced back at me, then answered him. Get up or die. Kenneth was, of course, right. We couldn't leave him behind. He was probably also right about the fact that keeping him with us was dangerous. Just because he looked old didn't mean he wasn't powerful. I reached out my hand for him to take, and I slowly pulled him up to standing. He grappling with the cloak, eager to cover himself. Once he seemed steady enough, I let go of him and helped Tuttons to keep himself covered. Where are we going? He asked softly. I am quite tired. I'm not surprised, I said. I'm not going to tell you where we're going, but I want you to come with us, at least for now. He nodded. Kenneth scowled, and Brennan hid behind him. I took a deep breath, acutely aware of the danger my decision was putting us in. But I'd had enough violence for one day, for one life. So I took Brennan's hand in mine and looked up at Kenneth. You go first. We will. Kenneth looked ready to explode with frustration, and I felt certain that most anyone would have been frightened by him in that moment. He was no longer a boy. But then, without another word, he walked by the man, nudging him roughly in the shoulder with his. The man almost fell, but Kenneth didn't wait or help or even see. I couldn't blame him. Still, as we moved away from the trees, I found myself wishing he could understand my own mind. I was aware that, old friend, it would likely be quite some time before that might happen. I would just have to wait. But if I'd thought that the man would be able to keep up, I'd been wrong. For the first half hour, he was able to shuffle through the grass. He had no shoes, and after a while I could see that his feet were bleeding from walking over the rocks and sharp, dead grasses. We need to stop, I said. Kenneth. Kenneth continued to walk, seemingly not ready to do anything else I requested. Kenneth, he's bleeding, I said. We need to do something about it. Finally, he paused, looking back. Who cares if he's bleeding? He's one of Torin's soldiers, not ours. I glared at him, then walked up to the man. As I got closer, I could see that he was shaking, with fear, with cold, maybe simple exhaustion. We will need to stop for the day, I said. Kenneth immediately snapped out of his stupor. What? What are you talking about? The morning is barely over. It was then Kenneth and I began to argue that the man began to fall. Guys, Brennan said, guys! And Brennan let go of my hand and ran toward the man, grabbing him under the arms, trying to prevent him from hitting the ground too hard. I frowned, then found I was impressed by him, by his willingness to face such a fear without hesitation. I walked up to them, then knelt down in the grass beside the man. We can't stop yet, but soon. We need to find somewhere to hide. Automatically, my gaze shifted upward toward the sky, searching more threats. I don't think he's here anymore, the man said quietly. I haven't heard his voice since I fell. Still, we can't be so stupid as to stop out in the open. There are more than just wicks out there. Come on. I reached out my hand for his. I can't do anything about your feet, but we will search for somewhere to stop for the afternoon. Kenneth started to argue, but then, seeing the look on my face, he closed his mouth and kept his opinions to himself. Do you think you can manage? I asked the man. But when he looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. He shook his head. Just kill me, he said. I don't think I have the strength to follow you, and he will surely return. I can't go back. I looked up at Kenneth, but I could see the idea I had already dawning on him without me even needing to speak it. He waited for a couple of long moments to pass, then approached us again, holding out his bat for Brennan. You take this. He turned back to me. Do you want me to carry him? It wasn't a question, and I didn't answer him. He leaned over and picked up the man, then began carrying him as a groom might carry a bride. Despite the threat the man presented, he soon laid his head on Kenneth's shoulder. It was only a few minutes longer before Kenneth abruptly stopped, looking down at the man's face. This isn't going to work. He's fading. I knew how badly Kenneth wanted to kill the man. Could see it on his face. Something else there as well. Pity. And could it be disgust? Maybe I can help, I said. We might not have to use the light. Let me try. Put him down in the grass. Kenneth did as I said, and when I reached the man's side, I knelt down and put my hands over his chest. I'd had experience with healing in two different ways. The first was to push healing energy inside. The second was to pull bad energy away. Something told me I would be pulling with him. I could only imagine how much pain he'd had inside for an untold number of years. So I closed my eyes, ready to give it everything I had. But I wasn't prepared for what I felt next, for as I attempted to pull the sickness out of him, I felt something I could only describe as blackness pouring out of his body. My eyes opened, and I found his wide with surprise. It was not unlike how he'd appeared when we'd given him the light, only now he seemed much more relieved than he had before. As I pulled the blackness away from his wrecked body, I was relieved that the smoke visited my hands, not feeling me as I'd feared. Slowly, the man closed his eyes, leaning back again. Only this time, there was peace upon his face as he fell to sleep. Kenneth continued to carry him for another solid hour as we looked for somewhere to hide. He didn't complain, and I found myself walking beside him. How are you doing? I asked. At first, he didn't answer. I didn't think he would, based on the look upon his face. But then he spoke. I'm doing fine, he said, irritated. He looked down at the man, but I thought I saw something a little different in his face as he did. He seems to be doing better. I haven't seen anywhere to hide. Have you? I hadn't, and I was just about to tell him so when we heard Brennan's voice behind us. Right there, he said. I seen a couple of them as we walked, and I didn't understand what they were before. Do you see where the grass gets thick? He pointed. We looked after him, then at the spot in the hill he was pointing to. He quickly ran up to it, his hands through a curtain of grass. Beneath it, a small cave. How did you figure that out? I asked. He shrugged. I wasn't sure at first, but then I realized that I recognized it. Regan and I used to hide in places like that, but I must have been really young because I didn't remember it well. Now it seems our problem is solved. He walked up to Kenneth, looking down at the man still asleep in his arms. For the first time that day, it appeared he was no longer frightened. Maybe it was seeing how weak man was, or maybe it was seeing how his grayed skin had turned back to ivory white. Kenneth and I looked at each other, but we didn't exchange words, simply followed Brennan inside the little cave. It would be too small for the horses, but it was just big enough for the four of us. Without being asked, Kenneth laid the man gently upon the ground. Then, when he stood up straight, he hit his head on the roof of the cave, swearing loudly. He glared at me, but I thought I understood. Okie dokie. That's it for today. I will be back here on Friday at 9 o'clock Pacific. Have a great rest of your week. If you have any questions for me, you can email me at jen@thehumanauthor.com. Thanks for joining.